the verge of a pretty major global food catastrophe. And so there really hasn't been a bigger need, I think, for innovative solutions. And so I'm super excited about this panel because we have some amazing leaders at the forefront of this space. So we're joined by a whole host of amazing people. We have Brian, the head of product at Bonsai Robotics, building solutions to automate agricultural machines working in just some of the toughest environments. We have Maddie Hall, the CEO of Living Carbon, a company that is gene editing trees to grow more quickly and sequester more carbon, amongst a whole bunch of other really cool things. Merritt Jenkins, the CEO of Kodama Systems, building tools to accelerate forest management operations. And Lena, Backe, the product and innovation lead at ClimateAI, building weather risk management tools for growers. Thank you guys for being here. I want to start out by just having each of you tell us a little bit about your company. What are you building? What problem are you trying to solve? And why is it important? Go ahead, Merritt.
Yeah. All right. We're focused on wildfire risk reduction. So pretty big problem here in California. Last year, wildfires emitted 1.4 gigatons of CO2 in just the Canadian wildfires. This is largely a manageable problem. You can manage these forests to reduce the risk of mega fires, which are the big million-acre fires that hit California every couple of years. The challenge to managing those is workforce availability is one of the really big ones, where there aren't a lot of people in this workforce traditionally. There are a lot more people needed in it, and it's a really difficult job. So the job looks a lot like logging. It's the most dangerous job in the US. Your commute times are 3 hours round trip every day. Your workers' comp, if you're trying to run a business, is 20% of your salary. So what we're doing is we're enabling teleoperation and autonomy of these heavy machines that operate in the woods. And so that enables you to both get some of these people out of the woods, which reduces your operating costs, expands that labor pool, but also enables you to run these shifts for 2 shifts instead of 1. Because typically the shifts, they run for 1 shift during the day, and they don't have the people to run a 2nd or 3rd shift. So that's really important from a revenue perspective for these companies as well.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me. So Living Carbon, as mentioned, we're solving the problem of maximizing the amount of carbon that can be sequestered per acre of land with a specific focus on degraded land. So land that is non-arable or not able to be used for food production. And we focus specifically on maximizing carbon sequestration on degraded mine lands by planting our photosynthesis enhanced trees alongside many other species to help basically crowd out the invasives that are existing there and create forest canopy cover in a shorter period of time. Why that matters is because in many cases, these mine land restoration projects are not economically viable to the companies that have these lands or from a carbon project development perspective. And so by having fast-growing trees planted on some of these sites, you're able to get carbon credits in a shorter window of time and also have very high quality, highly additional projects on some of the hardest lands to work on. It's about 1.6 million acres of degraded mine land in the US alone, and about 1 billion acres of degraded agricultural land globally. And we lose another 100 million hectares of healthy land a year. Traditional breeding programs will take 15 to 25 years to develop plants that will be able to grow on some of these more degraded sites. And we need to use CRISPR and synthetic biology to help shorten that time frame to 3 to 5 years.
Great. Hi everyone, my name is Lena. ClimateAI is a climate resilience platform, and we help companies mitigate their exposure to extreme weather events and climate change. And why that matters is extreme weather events are increasing in frequency and intensity. Just last year, the number of disasters that are deemed billion-dollar disasters was the highest ever in a single year at 28. So that's 28 individual billion-dollar disasters. And so where ClimateAI comes in is we want to help companies anticipate and mitigate those risks. And how we do that is we offer seasonal forecasts from 0 to 6 month time horizon, as well as decadal climate projections 10, 20, 30, 40 years out, so that companies can make decisions in the short and long term to help mitigate those disruptive effects of short-term extreme weather event exposure and long-term climate change.
Hey everyone, I'm Brian from Bonsai Robotics. The one sentence answer of what we do is we build autonomy systems for the toughest environments. What does that mean in practice? Largely we work in agricultural spaces, specifically the orchard, nut orchards, things like that, where you get a lot of dust, you get a lot of branches, you get things that are really difficult to work in, things that the on-road systems, for example, that you might see around San Francisco aren't as good at handling. And why does that matter? Well, the obvious answer to what we provide is that we provide growers with a way to lower costs, do things more efficiently, and essentially do more with less. The kind of more hidden part of what we're doing is that labor in agriculture in particular, in the orchard in particular, is a highly skilled role and also is hard to find. So we're enabling growers to continue to work on their orchards, to continue to harvest their crops, and to do more with less when they can't find the labor, or the labor isn't up to the par that they need for the work that they're doing. And then there are also some sort of less obvious advantages of using the machines and the machine innovations that we have. So we work with our partners to build new machine types that can do things like off-ground harvest, or be more efficient with fuel, or do some of these things. So in addition to kind of helping with like labor issues or reducing costs for growers, or helping them to do ultimately more with what they have, we're also able to do some good things for the environment along the process. So it ends up being kind of a win-win for a lot of different areas within what we're doing.
Awesome, thank you guys. Brian, I'd love to just start with you. You've had this amazing career working in robotics and autonomy across a whole bunch of different domains. You worked in space and oceans and autonomous vehicles. What actually brought you to Bonsai, and why did you want to work in ag tech?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I worked as an engineer at SpaceX, and also I worked at Liquid Robotics, which we have my friend Terry here in the audience as well, and on road with companies like Aurora and Uber ATG. For me, I think that there were two parts to it. One is, I think, the one that a lot of people would answer, which is like the food kind of need, the ability to improve the way that we get food, the way that we harvest the food we're working on, those sorts of things. That was an area that just felt like it was a really good thing to be working on. I also mentioned some of like the climate aspects of what we're doing, and I think that those all feel like areas where it's like this is an important problem that will affect a lot of people, and that makes it kind of worth doing, for lack of a better phrase. And then like from a personal perspective, I've done a lot of different robots in the ocean, in the sky, and on land, and they all had various impacts, and were all very important. But I think I learned a lot, especially in the on-road work that I was doing over the last 5 years with like self-driving cars and trucks. So for me, I felt like I could bring some of that expertise to the agricultural space, which would benefit the company. But from my perspective, I stood to learn quite a bit about the agricultural kind of processes, which I didn't know much about. So even just in the short time I've been at Bonsai, I've learned a ton about how nuts are harvested. If you don't know how it's done, it's a very interesting process, and you should go Google it, because there are videos on YouTube, and these machines are crazy. But yeah, the machines were really interesting, and the problem was also really interesting, and I'm learning a ton, and so that was personally really interesting for me.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Last year you guys raised about $13.5 million in a seed round, I believe. What were some of the challenges and skepticisms you encountered while trying to raise that money?
Yeah, I think that one of the obvious ones is just raising money is hard in general. You always have to be kind of working toward that next raise, and meeting people and explaining your problem and why it's important. So all of that was true for us as well. In addition to that, I think that some of the VC funds over the past however long you want to look at, few years, has been a little bit of a difficult time to raise, especially in certain industries. Some of the funds have been kind of moving from one industry to another. Some of the funds kind of not closed up, but were a little bit harder to attract, I think, for some period of time. And I think one thing that I've noticed coming from, again, the on-road space most recently to kind of the off-road space, and particularly in ag, is that a lot of the money that might have been going into self-driving cars and trucks over the past decade has consolidated, first of all, with the companies. So you're starting to see more and more of these companies become kind of one company, or even shut down aspects of working on those areas. But in addition, I think a lot of what I've personally seen is VC money moving from sort of that domain to these problems like agriculture or other off-road environments where the problem is maybe a little bit more confined, and so you can kind of like maybe solve it. I'm not gonna say easier, but like you at least have a better idea of how you're gonna get there. The markets may look smaller, but when you start to look at like all the applications that you have, they actually could end up being like pretty large and really interesting to both people who want to start a company and also to VCs. And then I think in general too, it's just like finding the right partners like we did for some of our early investments. That was also like a really important aspect of it. So I think just like, again, kind of working toward that funding all the time, obviously still really difficult, but something that can be done, and then just having the right story to tell that aligns with sort of like where the interest is going with whether it's VC or the market. We got lucky on timing as well as just like having a really good idea at the right time.
Yeah, totally. One of the things you talked about is just like how much you've learned in the ag space. And specifically, I'd love to hear more about your experience selling to farmers. I think that's a like very specific and unique user group. And so what have been some of your takeaways there?
Yeah, growers are a really interesting customer. For one thing, they have, if you look at like the life of an almond tree, for example, it's about 40 seasons. And if they have like 40 years to kind of do their experiment and every year try something new if they want to, and either get it right or they may completely fail and then not have an opportunity to do this again, right? They could go bankrupt or something. So they're obviously a little cautious about new things, but also they're really interested in those innovations in like what is going to make their process more streamlined, what's going to make it more cost effective, all those things. So, you might think that you'd go to the Central Valley and start talking to growers and they would have no interest in technology. It's not Silicon Valley, et cetera. But that's really not the case. I think that they are very much like, sell us anything you can that's going to make that better for us. The flip side is, unlike a lot of customers that you might find in the on-road autonomy space or in any other space for that matter, they know exactly what they want. So they might ask you when you come out, does your product do X? And if you say, no, we're working on that, but we're not quite there, they'll say, great, I'll take 10 of them, but come back when you can do X. So you have kind of this idea of like, not quite black and white, but you have some idea of where you're headed, and if you can reach kind of their expectations, then they're kind of all in. And so, I think that like, working with growers and learning what their needs are and how we can best support them has been really interesting. And then obviously like tailoring our offerings toward like what growers want and what the market wants has been kind of like a large part of my job as the product leader at Bonsai.
Thank you. Merritt, I'd love to hop to you quickly. I think like Bonsai, Kodama Systems is working in a very like physical domain, right? You're making forestry machines semi-autonomous. There's lots of sensors, there's lots of hardware. To an investor, that might sound quite capital intensive. And so how do you think about like building for profitability and creating something that is like venture scalable?
Yeah, so we have a very similar approach to Bonsai in that these equipment manufacturers are really good at making equipment, whether it's for forestry or for shaking trees. So we're not building the equipment, we're just building the sensing and machine intelligence. So we're really an integrator on the sensing and compute side, and then underneath that, we're a software company. And so when you look at the benefits to what we're doing, which is biggest benefit is get the operator out of the woods and run it overnight. For Bonsai, it's how much more efficient are you than one person?
Yeah, depending on what you're doing with our systems, like you can run 1 to 4 systems or more, so it can be quite an efficiency increase, and we're also about twice as fast as most operators.
So for both companies, it really enables that venture capital mold of looking for a 60% plus gross margin business is what both of our business, at least I assume Bonsai is trying to hit, and that's what Kodama is
on the right
trying
track.
Yeah.
One of the things we talked about is you guys have plans to actually like create a subsidiary that owns the end-to-end logging operation, which is a bit different from the model you just described. And so what are you hoping to gain from this in terms of insights, and how's that going to impact the company?
Yeah, so one of the big challenges with robotics is systems don't work 99.99% of the time when they're prototypes, and our systems are going to be effectively prototypes for a while. And so if you can control the environment, generate revenue from running your own operation internally, and also have full control over the site, so that means that for things like On the safety side, you don't need to have your human detector as optimized, because you can now just have site controls to enable safety. You can also do things like lay out the trees in a way that's more accommodative to autonomy. And then from a sales perspective, if you're running your own operation, you can then bring either industrial timberland owners or loggers, whoever our customer is in this case, out to our site and say, look at what we've done. This is how we've structured it differently. We're running our operations for multiple shifts. And fortunately, in the industry in which we work, you can buy a logging company for not a crazy amount of money. $1 million, you can buy a logging company. Now, the reason for that is logging companies don't make a lot of money, so there's no real premium. You're actually just buying the assets and buying the crew. But that's the approach that we're taking to enable us to build out that model and have full control.
And so out of all the industries that you could have applied, teleoperation and autonomy to, how did you land on forestry management?
Yeah, so from an autonomy teleoperation perspective, forestry is one of the harder industries to tackle. But from a customer need perspective, so both you have a ramp up in demand from wildfires. You have a demographic trend where there are half as many forest managers today as there were 20 years ago. And then you look at the cost structure of simply getting the people out to the woods, and the fact that they're only running one shift, that even though it's a harder thing to manage the teleoperation and autonomy, the value creation is massive. And so the venture capital panel was talking about, when you take on a problem, you really need to make sure that you're taking on a venture scale problem. And that's the lens that I took when looking at what are the different applications for robotics outdoors. And this is a venture scale problem, but it's a hard problem to take on too.
Ag seems to face pretty similar problems. Do you have your eyes on that sector, or are you pretty focused on the forestry management?
Forestry is big enough to build a venture scale company just in the forestry sector. So there are a lot of people doing ag, so we're not looking at that right now.
Okay, awesome, great to hear. Maddie, I'd love to switch over to you and chat a little bit about the founding of Living Carbon. You had, I think, a really interesting career path. You worked at YC and OpenAI, and I'm curious just how those experiences shaped the ethos of the company that you then left to build.
I think one of the takeaways was how much research gets stuck in the lab that never sees the light of day. And it's such a shame that the world operates in the way it does like that. I think with AI, with climate, et cetera, you have all these papers getting published all of the time, right? But actually to be able to mirror or to combine frontier research and commercial deployment, there were not very many entities that were doing that at the time for AI and at the time for climate. Now that's changed a lot in both cases. And so, it's a bit of a hindsight 2020. But I think for me, really enabling the ability for researchers to have a place to go where they could do both frontier research and have that research have a large scale impact because we were focused on these larger commercial projects is very similar to sort of OpenAI's recruiting strategy as well as Living Carbon's. I think also trying to change the narrative around the role that a lot of these really powerful technologies can play in making the world better, right? With AI, up until a year and a half ago, people thought of AI, they thought of not ChatGPT, but they thought of Terminator and all these really negative examples of this technology that were purely fiction, right? And I think it's the same thing with genetic engineering. People don't really have a relevant benchmark, or their benchmark is bad, right? Their benchmark is Monsanto, or they don't have a scientific based understanding. I'm starting to answer your second question. Sorry, I can just stop.
No, it's all good. I mean, you're exactly leading into it.
Talking about the role that organizations can play in demonstrating through the deployment of a new product, it basically flipping some of these societal challenges on its head and saying, actually, these technologies can be used for good. Here's an example of how they're being used for good. Technology is neither good nor bad. It's all in the application.
Yeah, so you started getting there, but one of the things, obviously one of the big efforts is gene editing trees, and there's a lot of benefits, right? You can now grow trees in integrated land, and they grow faster, they sequester more carbon. But gene editing, like you said, I think has quite a, can get a bad rep sometimes. And so how have you navigated that and worked with regulators to kind of get on the other side of that?
I mean, the regulators love us. The regulators are actually quite scientific in how
Did they
go
love you
along.
right off the bat?
They did, actually, because they're like, wow, this is an example. Like, photosynthesis-enhanced trees capture people's minds and they capture people's hearts in a way that, like, glyphosate-resistant corn really does not. So they thought of us as almost a potential rebrand, right? There was a panel today, GMO 2.0, that really talked about that. You know, we're regulated by USDA. FDA is optional for us as well. And so I think that really hasn't been as much of the issue. I get asked that question probably like every single week, maybe more often. I try to separate it out into, okay, do you just have a nebulous fear? And your nebulous fear is just due to lack of information? Or do you have a specific concern? Right? And so when I separate those out, that kind of dictates the approach that I take.
So I think some of the concerns could be, you know, unintended consequences. Maybe they take over native species or completely grow out of control. Like, how do you prove that that's not happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of like regulatory science that you can do. Actually, like it's honestly some of the dumbest experiments in my mind because of the fact that like they are just really silly. Like, of course, it's going to end up not being a negative outcome, right? So, for example, you grind up a bunch of leaves in the soil, right? Leaves of the engineered tree. You grind up a bunch of leaves of the control tree, you put them in the soil, you try to plant flowers in each pot to make sure that you can have natural regeneration happening in both cases. You will get natural regeneration in both cases. So I only say that with like a tone of somewhat frustration because some of the things are quite, I guess from a science perspective, not like really valid questions. However, to your point of will they take over? Will they outcompete everything else? I think it's really important to look at biochemically what we're doing, right? We're not making them resistant to any other disease that would otherwise kill the existing species, right? Like our trees will, like if we planted a monoculture over trees, there'd probably be some sort of disease that would wipe them out because monocultures are bad, right? They don't do well when it comes to creating diverse forests. So I could talk about this a lot, but I think biochemically looking at what we're doing, recognizing, okay, it happens in 15% of all plants naturally, right? Improved photosynthetic efficiency. It's actually just part of what will hopefully allow plants to be able to survive climate change, right? We're supposed to lose, I think it's like 60% biodiversity as a result. And that's largely due to the fact that landscapes are becoming impossible for plants to grow in.
And so if you haven't had a lot of difficulty with like public sentiment or regulators, like what have been some of the big challenges you guys have encountered?
Oh, I mean, public sentiment is a challenge.
Okay.
Like, I'm not gonna lie about that. Oh man, I think, sorry, the question was what have been some challenges? I mean, that's one of it. Like, I think you see a lot of sensationalization of headlines that are not based in science, but rather aiming for clickbait. And even if someone comes in and tries to understand what you're doing genuinely, their editor might not. And so they have some sort of headline that's attempting to, call what we're doing Frankentrees. And, sure, you can do that, but like, who does that help? Nobody. I don't know. Yeah. So I think one thing that I've learned in having tried to genuinely engage with the press and be really transparent and open is the fact that owning the narrative for ourselves is much better than having other people tell our story. And that I think is true in any climate company, in any hard tech space. So for us, what that means is like, we hosted an open greenhouse today. We had like 85 people show up. They toured our greenhouse, they learned about the trees, they asked some good questions, right? Being able to do that instead of relying on other people to tell your story, you have to tell it yourself.
Can you tell us a little bit about the carbon market landscape and how that is changing?
Sure. Sorry, other panelists. All right, so the carbon market landscape, I was thinking of how I was going to answer this before. It's basically like a trend cycle right now. And like we started in a world when living carbon first started where improved forest management was the only type of carbon project you could do because the price per ton that you could sell your carbon for was like $4. So that was what you had to do, or avoided conversion. There wasn't anything else out there. So that was like the initial path that we took. Then DAC started getting a lot of press, and then it was the DAC show, right? And then there was a really intense focus on permanence, right? 1,000-year plus bio-oil injection, and that became what people really want, right? But then there was a realization that, ooh, how did those scale? DAC isn't scaling. What's going to happen? No offense to any DAC companies. I think you can scale. But like, DAC isn't scaling. What are we going to do? Okay, mineral weathering. That seems like easy enough, grinding up a bunch of rocks. There are a lot of rocks. So then there was a focus on that. And then basically after that, it's like, oh, well, wait a second. Actually, there's MRV challenges there too. We can solve them, but maybe critiquing forestry initially around all your MRV challenges wasn't like, we haven't solved all of those problems yet with the carbon market. You know, some of these new technologies, they haven't fully solved the existing issues that people were critiquing originally back in 2018. So, you know, then after, I mean, weathering is still definitely, like, I think the removal method du jour. I think it's great. And now you kind of have people coming back to nature-based because of a cost function. So
one quick question and then we'll move on.
Yeah,
But
of course.
I'm curious, just, you know, given some of the changes around like regulating scope 3 emissions, like does that impact your business at all? And if so, how have you shifted things?
Yes, it 100% impacts our business. It impacts every carbon removal company. Like you can't, at least for me, it's really hard for me to see beyond the next like 10 massive customers. I think the next 20, the next 100 become really hard to have a line of sight to, in my mind. And so you have to look at other markets. You can't put all of your eggs in the carbon removal basket, especially if you have a physical product. Like for us, we have a tree, so it could go, we can deploy it into timber, deployed for, you know, SAF, BECCS. Like we're looking at those other markets specifically around the need for waste biomass as potential areas in which we can deploy our trees for very similar projects. So I think it's kind of, can you run a new process for the same product and deploy it into a different market that is larger and that is has a stronger signal in terms of being established?
Got it. So it's definitely diversifying. Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, lots of questions. But Lena, I'd love to switch to you and talk a little bit about ClimateAI. As I'm sure folks can guess, you know, given the name, AI is a huge part of your business. And so specifically, you guys are looking at weather modeling, which is, you know, notoriously difficult. It's really hard to predict. Not only that, there's tons of public data sets, and scientists tend to like publicly publish their predictions. And so how do you guys differentiate your product, and how do you think about creating a moat?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think about it in two ways. I think one part is how we build our models, and the second is how we translate our models into decision making. So on the how we build our models front, you're totally right. There is ample public data and scientific publications, but this space is really crowded mostly in the 0 to 2 week time horizon. So forecasting out the next 14 days. It's very crowded, and unfortunately it's not a super helpful time horizon to inform a lot of strategic decision making. So what ClimateAI does is we use a blend of, yes, public, but also proprietary data sources to build patented models that span both 0 to 6 months, so basically a full season, as well as decadal climate projections, 10, 20, 30 years out. And what that really enables us to do is help meet our customers, who are folks in the food sector, the agriculture sector, also finance, manufacturing, to make strategic decisions that are not about what's happening 2 months from now, but are happening 3, 6 months from now in terms of when to plant, how much to plant, where to plant, how much to buy, and things like that. But I think the other part is the translation piece. So we don't just have raw forecasts that folks have to then interpret. One of our special sauces is our ability to translate that into impact on their particular assets. So take a heat wave. A heat wave doesn't have the same impact on a building as it does a person, as it does a crop, and even on a crop, it doesn't impact wheat the same way it does oats or barley, because those crops have different vulnerabilities to heat, and that also depends on when in their growing cycle that heat wave hits. So what we really do is both proprietary model, but blend it with what is the actual impact on your asset so that you can actually make sense of what is the risk exposure, what is the impact, what is the timing to actually make some of these decisions both further in advance than other models enable and for your specific assets.
When we're talking about, predictions at such a long-term scale, like one of the things that we've talked about is the difficulty when kind of the best case scenario is there's no risk to the customers' crops. And so how do you sort of navigate value to the customer and build trust in the product, especially around those like long-term predictions? Because it's hard to know whether you're right until we're 6 months or a decade out.
Yeah, definitely. And this is something we talk to customers about all the time. So a couple different points is like on the technology side, we have a tool that's very plug and play for us that enables us to basically run automated hindcasts to say, how did our model perform on any particular variable in any particular location? And by variable, I mean precipitation, heat, evapotranspiration, all the different kind of meteorological variables. We can say, how did we perform with what lead time at this location? And that helps build trust in that kind of short-term and seasonal piece so that folks can actually say, okay, you're issuing this forecast. Are you confident enough in it that I can make a decision based off of this? And that's really important. But then there's the long-term side of things, right? We don't have a counterfactual for what's going to happen in 2030, 2040, 2050. And so on that side, we really think about enabling decision accuracy. So that's really about our models being able to spot extremes and outliers that will inform long-term planning decisions for our customers. So that can be understanding if there will be water available in a particular region, understanding if sea level rise will be enough of an issue that you shouldn't place that factory that you're making this long-term investment decision in, or understanding if a particular region will even be a viable growing or sourcing location for a given crop based on how conditions are evolving, and we're able to help provide enough decision accuracy to answer those questions. And I think the other part is it's a super nascent space. So we have a platform, it's very self-serve, you could look and digest this data on your own, but also a lot of this is our climate data scientists and our agronomists also sitting with customers and translating a lot of this for them and helping them workshop these decisions and make trade-offs, because these are, in the long term, they're usually quite capital-intensive decisions that they're making that the 20, 30-year climate projections really matter in terms of what kind of trade-offs they're making.
And so in terms of like really building trust, would you say it's really having the agronomists in the room and the experts sitting down with customers, given that there's no counterfactual?
Yeah, and I think it's really a mix of climate expertise, showing different trade-offs and kind of climate value at risk based on different emission scenarios in the long term. And I really think that increasingly companies are turning to us because they don't have this expertise in-house. So it's a lot to try to build risk models and weather models on your own. And so I think it's really about that collaboration of like proving impact that we've had in the short term and seasonal, and then also building that trust in the long term through our models and back testing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that expertise is critical. Brian, Bonsai is also doing a lot in the AI space and specifically around computer vision, which can be hard to differentiate with all the data that's out there and all the existing open source models. And so how do you guys think about defensibility as well in what you're doing?
Yeah, to sort of, I guess, not answer your question at the beginning, one thing that I found really interesting in ag is, the relationships matter a ton. And so one thing I think that Bonsai does, which is not a defensible strategy, but it is actually helpful, is, rather than being a company that shows up to these growers' farms and their livelihood and saying, we know your business better than you do, watch this. We show up with our over 50 years combined of agricultural background and sort of are saying, hey, we understand what you're trying to do, we have an idea, do you want to try it out? And kind of like I said before, when I was talking about kind of working with growers, like they are generally receptive to this type of thing, and so we can move forward that way. The defensibility side of things, with computer vision, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to go about trying to move a robot in the world. A lot of companies use other technologies that don't work as well in kind of the dusty and kind of difficult environments that we're in. And there are ways to get around that. But in our case, I think that we're focused on vision as a first technology, and in doing so, we're able to lower the cost of autonomy, which makes it more reachable to a lot of customers and a lot of potential growers, a lot of growers and potential customers. And I think that the other thing that we're doing is we've kind of gone after this this visual technology where we can it's kind of a researchy concept when we started, and we've kind of taken the time to actually, I'll say, productionize it, right? We're working on productionizing it, and I think that that's like sort of the way that our strategy ends up being defensible in the computer vision space. It's just we're working on something that's a little bit unique, a little bit of a different approach. It's highly useful in our particular domain, and then applying it to the domain with kind of the relationships we've built and with sort of some of the other advantages that we have as a company has proven to be a useful strategy for us.
And how much have you focused on like crafting your own proprietary data sets versus just focusing on kind of the other things you mentioned?
Yeah, so I mean that's another big part of it. Thanks for reminding me to mention it. But we have basically taken over 500,000 acres of orchard data, which we have not checked this, but believe it's probably the largest orchard data set in the world. So that helps play into our machine learned models. That helps play into our sort of technology as a whole. And so that is another area where we have a strong advantage from the data we've collected, and we can use that in sort of the proprietary technology that we have to keep advancing what we're doing and keep making it better every day.
Awesome. Lena, going back to you quick, how do you feel like the climate risk sector is specifically evolving? Focusing on agriculture, like are there new regulatory challenges you're dealing with, or other issues that you're trying to track closely?
Yeah, I think the climate risk sector has become increasingly top of mind for folks. Unfortunately, given the frequency of extreme weather events, it's no longer an abstract problem in people's mind. And I think they're very, very costly, and money makes people wake up and care. And I think that has meant that a lot of companies that were working and pursuing climate risk that used to be at the forefront, climate risk is now kind of a necessary table stakes tool that they need to be equipped with to manage this kind of era of extremes. And so I think what that has meant is that climate risk is more top of mind than ever, and I also think we're thinking about it in more holistic ways. I think it's traditionally been climate risk to assets, but I think we're also thinking about climate risk in terms of impact on health outcomes, climate risk in terms of impact on gender equity, on labor. You're seeing cities that have chief heat officers and thinking about urban design related to how we adapt to this new normal of weather. And then I think, less abstractly on the regulatory side, obviously there's been a lot of changes with the SEC that have been previously mentioned on this panel, but in March, their ruling said that as of 2025, large publicly traded companies need to assess and disclose current and future material transition and physical climate risk. And so that's something that we as ClimateAI are equipped with to help companies do, to help report on their both acute and chronic climate stresses in a TCFD compliant way. So that's something that's very top of mind for us.
Awesome. I know we're running close on time and people look tired, so I want to end with a question for all of you, which is, what is a space or innovation in your sector that you are extremely bullish on, and is there areas that you'd like to see more investment in? Merritt, kick it off.
Sure. Looking at what are the really big levers today, methane detection. That's like a really solvable problem today. Bunch of companies in the space, but there should probably be more. Waste to value. So, for example, about 50% of the material that, actually it's the stat is 80% of the material that comes off of the forest thinning projects that we work on gets pile burned. So we have a waste to value project. There's a lot of opportunity, whether it's corn stover, whether it's forestry wastes. And then generally just the hard to decarbonize sectors. So cement making, steel, aviation fuel, those are sectors that there's a fair amount of money going into, and that's a really long-term need.
Is there anything in forestry specifically that you're excited about or would like to see more investment in?
Yeah, we're like the only company. Other than, yeah, what am I saying? But looking at it from a wildfire, an on-the-ground wildfire lens, there's a lot going on in wildfire detection. So I think that space is pretty saturated. But utilizing the material to make things like sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen, biochar. We've developed something called a carbon vault, which is a method of burying the material in the desert to just store that carbon with high durability, 1,000-year life. So yeah, utilize the material that comes off of these forest thinning sites because it's crazy it all gets pile burned.
Love it. Maddie, what are you excited about?
Yep, that was going to be mine. The waste biomass. Oh gosh, I mean, I think what I would like to see is more focus on technologies that enable the scaling of different carbon removal solutions, as imperfect as they may be, right? Like if there was a silver bullet, we would have found it at this point. Well, I mean, maybe the silver bullet is solar radiation management, but that's not really the silver bullet anybody wants to use. So, you know, I don't think there's a specific innovation. One thing that would be really cool is if there was like a YC safe like agreement for multi-year offtake agreements or some sort of standardization of offtakes, whether that's for biomass from slash or carbon, that could help other companies beyond just the biggest companies in the world start to think more proactively and long term about how to invest in these spaces while feeling okay about the contracts and the risk that they're taking on by making some of these small investments.
Why do you think that's not happening right now? Like, what's blocking it?
I've asked a lot of people to do this. I think they're busy. Man, what's blocking? It's so bespoke, and it's some of the risks that you have to account for in contracting are very pathway specific. But someone should do it and make like a version per pathway. So,
Love it. Lena?
I will start with a selfish answer and then I'll expand more broadly. Selfishly, we launched a new product today that is a climate-driven yield forecasting product. It's called Monitor Yield Outlook, and essentially it is directed to help sourcing and procurement folks understand their climate-related risk to yield on a global basis with the hope of helping mitigate some of that supply volatility and take a lot of the guesswork out of how to translate extreme weather events into impact on yield. So happy to share more about that. But I think more broadly, things that I'm excited about are, I know that kind of the overarching theme of agriculture for a while and sustainability has been regenerative agriculture. So I don't think that's a new one, but I think it's critically important, especially as we think about soil health and the sustainability of our crops. And then I think more broadly, I am very excited about innovations in the insurance space in agriculture. I think there's very cool mechanisms being developed related to parametric insurance, whether that's related to yields and crops or related to extreme weather events, and enabling companies to get immediate automated payouts to enable them to more quickly rebuild after these events. So I think that's a very cool space that we'll see more in.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything about insurance, but just hearing you say that, it made me think that there are a lot of kind of financial engines that are out there that are maybe showing up now, that the market is sort of like stronger in some of these areas, and that's a really good one. And I think there's a lot of related pieces to that as well. The one I was going to say is we've already seen from a lot of our OEM partners kind of the new machine types and the new kind of like ways of working that autonomy is sort of enabling for them. And in kind of seeing those new types and how they're doing these things, this is where a lot of like the big climate gains are going to come in our industry, you know, reducing emissions or even potentially moving to electric, although there are some problems with that in the ag space, but like it's definitely a thing that can happen with some investment. You know, raising harvest off the ground so that you make less dust. All these things are I think possible, and when you add in sort of the lowered complexity of operating the machine that autonomy provides, you start to see some of those gains and advancements in the machines themselves. So working with our OEM partners or just like, you know, new people creating new companies, there's a lot of opportunity to make the process better, whether it's for people, the climate, or any number of other aspects. So that's some of the stuff I'm excited to see in the ag space.
Awesome. Last thing is you're in a room with, you know, a bunch of people who are either looking to join something or start something. And so if there's any plugs that you want to make, I think there's lots of people interested in looking for opportunities. So I would love to give you all a chance.
Sure. We're hiring, so looking to hire one more robotic software engineer. Also looking to hire a field engineer. So if you're interested in, even if you don't have a robotics background, interested in just being in the Sierras, starting now through middle of November, and you want to live out in the Sierras, it's pretty awesome. So come talk to me if you're interested in that role.
I think we are hiring mostly research associates on the R&D side of things, but we are looking to expand our supply chain capacity and also bring on some folks that maybe have more expertise within the policy space, and also doing a couple of AI-related projects. So if you do have machine learning experience and want to contribute to something on a consulting or pro bono basis, that would be amazing.
We are hiring for one data science role in remote sensing space, and then I would also say summer is fast approaching and we have more demand than we can keep up with. So if you are a data scientist, climate scientist, ag scientist, and are looking for summer internship or opportunities, I'm sure we could use your help, and please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, I think the same thing. We're hiring kind of across the board. In particular, if you have a background in robotics, computer vision, visual SLAM, those are some of the big things for us. So everything's on our website, our career website, and you can come talk to me as well.
Awesome. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions, so can turn it to the crowd.
I have a question for Maddie. How have you adjusted to the shift in purchasing carbon credits? If that's been the primary source of revenue for you guys, if it's gone from the red plus to more GAC or things like that, have you navigated that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like I said earlier, when we started out, we thought that we would work on existing forests and do IFM projects, and we do 0 IFM projects now. I think we've really had to focus on where we see the most demand within the nature-based space, and that is in the highest quality nature-based projects. So basically projects where it's very clear that they're additional with limited leakage, and those are the projects like mine land reforestation, where you don't have a high rate of natural regeneration. I think we still see a good amount of demand. Specifically, a lot of the demand that was in IFM is moving now towards reforestation, afforestation credits. It does seem like most companies want to have both nature-based as a bet and also engineered carbon removal as a bet. So, I think it's actually, I would say, almost been good for us from a sense of there are people that are more interested in reforestation and willing to pay a premium because of the critique of IFM, as well as some of the high price point in the engineered solutions. That being said, the market is still too small, and we do need more people that are, or more companies that are not afraid of offsets, right? Offsets as a whole has gotten a negative reputation incorrectly, in my mind.
Okay, we'll take maybe two more because I see a lot of questions. Yeah, go ahead.
What are maybe one or two books that you've read that have really helped inform your perspective on space, or that you kind of keep going back to?
Is that for everyone, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, the question was, what are one or two books you've read that inform your perspective on the space? Merritt?
I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm not reading a lot of books
Don't
right
read.
now, to be honest.
I actually read pretty much exclusively climate fiction, so I have some answers. I would check out The Displacements if you're interested in climate refugees and sort of water rise. I think Terraformation Shock is quite good. Ministry of the Future is a classic one. Let's see, what else is out there? I have my top 3.
Any nonfiction?
I live that day to day, so I don't really read a lot of nonfiction.
Maybe let me tweak the question. What about podcasts or newsletters?
Braiding Sweetgrass is a great nonfiction book.
Braiding Sweetgrass. Okay.
I'll add in podcast Catalyst by Shale Khan is really good for giving you a sense of what's going on in this sector.
Lena.
I was going to plug Ministry for the Future, as well as I think speed and scale is really helpful for adding structure as you're thinking about how to dissect the space and where sectors need the most effort and time and investment. In terms of newsletters, I really love, I think it's Ag Food Tech newsletter has a really interesting mix on how we're changing agricultural practices, eating practices, grocery innovation, the whole realm. So if you're interested in this space, that's a good one.
You guys have your own podcast too, right? ClimateAI. I think I saw that. Maybe?
Maybe.
Okay.
It might be sporadic.
Yeah, I don't have much in this space in particular. I will say I listened to a podcast on Amazon called Nut Jobs, which was about almond heists, which was kind of interesting. So you can check that out. If you wanna go, I guess more useful things that I've read, maybe more useful for founders or for leaders of companies or things like that. I'll always recommend things like Extreme Ownership, Leaders Eat Last, Never Split the Difference. Those are all really good books for just general business and leadership and running teams, those sorts of things.
Anything around ag or forestry?
I haven't read a lot around ag or forestry. I have our CEO Tyler around me most of the time, and that's like listening to a podcast, like almost like a fire hose. So you can hang out with Tyler. That's another option. You'll learn a lot.
All right, we'll do one last question. Go ahead.
With nearly 40% of our global land mass degraded now, what is the best or the highest leverage point for AI to bring back ecological health and biodiversity?
Did everyone hear that?
You should repeat it.
Okay, what is the highest leverage point to use AI to bring back ecological diversity, given the fact that 40% of the land has been degraded?
I would say helping with site selection to determine which sites are the highest likelihood to need intervention, but also will have the highest likelihood of success if reforested, or like what types of sites are best suited for certain species as well. There's so much. I have a list of projects I could send you. So yes, very, very happy to send that along. Determining carbon potential too. Like calculating the potential carbon removal that you could do on a site if it was reforested, because then you very clearly get to the ROI on the site. Like helping with species selection as well as just identifying which lands you can plant on.
What's involved with like determining possible carbon sequestration? Is it not just looking at the land and the trees you can grow?
You're also looking at a methodology, so calculating the potential credits that you would get based off of a methodology, and you're also looking at climate risk, so integrating that, what I just said, with likelihood of reversal, right? Because if there's a reversal, then that's very bad, and that's where ClimateAI comes in.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for hanging out. All right.
Do some closing. Okay, before you go, we'd love to see a show of hands. Who's learned something new today? All right. Who's been inspired today? Oh. And who's met someone new today? Amazing. As you can tell, our goal was really to educate, inspire, and connect all of you. So it looks like we've achieved what we wanted to. So huge thanks to everybody, the panelists. You can see the logo today. I think we went from megatrends to hearing from new technology, to hear about behavior, customer changes. It's been an incredible journey today. So please don't stop here as we introduce our community. So I wanted to share a few more resources we've put together, but we had more from this panel, because thank you for your recommendation. Again, a big thanks to Goodwin Procter for today and some of the cups we shared today. And finally, keep in touch with us. We're the four hosts today. David, I don't know where you are, but Megs, Mark, myself, will probably be here next year, I think. It was such a great event. And as I said, before we leave, just take a few screenshots, contact me if you can't find the link, but we want you to follow our LinkedIn page, the Xugler and Climate community, so you can keep in touch with us with the event we're going to put together. Deepti and I will be hosting a webinar next week, a really short one to really recap what we've learned today from all these amazing founders, and probably more during SF Climate Week, so it's going to be on Thursday. And then we're putting together a Notion page with resources for funders, so feel free also to share things you like and things that have been helpful to facilitate this transition. On behalf of the team, on behalf of the community, thank you so much. And one more thing.
Sorry, one last thing. If anybody has ideas of other events that we could do, other ways that we could continue the community, education, etc., please let me know. It's hard to think of new ideas and like new events that people would want to do without hearing from people. So definitely reach out to me. I love doing this. I learn a lot, and yeah, thank you so much.